Is the slideshow showing? Okay, great. So my talk today is called What Amazônia Can Teach Us About Building Teams. And I'm going to start with a few stories and examples to set the context. And then I'll introduce myself. And then we'll kind of get into the heart of the discussion today. So this is a photo that was taken in China. This is the Great Green Wall, and it was a project started about 40 years ago. And what was happening is that in China, the Great Gobi Desert is actually taking over a lot of the continent. And so the Chinese government decided that to try and fix this problem, they would plant trees along the desert to stop the desert from growing. Unfortunately, this plan didn't really work for two reasons. The first is that you can see this is a monocrop, meaning that there's only one species of tree. And so in a single year, 1 billion trees died because a pest came along that this specific species was vulnerable to. The second problem is that this species doesn't even thrive in this environment. So they introduced a species that doesn't belong here. And as a result, it used up all of the water and all of the natural resources and actually killed a lot of the native species that were in the area. So overall, the Great Green Wall has not been very successful, unfortunately, even though the intentions were very good to try and help China and help stop the spread of the Gobi Desert. These are photos that I took in the Amazon 2 years ago. So I traveled there, and the Amazon, as many of you might know, has over 80,000 species of plants. This is completely different from the Great Green Wall that you saw in the previous slide. All of these plants are different and they work together almost like a team to make the incredible biodiverse rainforest that is the Amazon. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through the rest of the presentation today. But before I kind of jump into it, I want to start with a quiz to orient you and have you really thinking critically about this. So the slide here is an executive team, and it's the executive team of a very popular technology company. In fact, it's probably a company that all of you have used and you've definitely heard of. So can you guess which executive team which company this executive team belongs to? Well, this is Airbnb. And even though this is just one company, the demographics of the executive team at Airbnb is actually the demographics of most technology companies, especially in the United States. So you can see that most of the executive team is male and most of them are white. But I want to give you another example. So in this case, I'll give you the name of the company. This is the executive team of Spotify. And as you know, Spotify is a service where you can listen to music. So musicians are pretty important. In this case, I want to ask you, how many of the executive team do you think are musicians? So maybe they've performed in the past, they had a career in music, in some way were involved in being a musician. Well, the answer is 0. So this is interesting because Spotify has recently come under a lot of attack for not prioritizing musicians. In fact, most of the money that you spend each month paying Spotify, very, very little of it ends up going to the musician. So everyone on this executive team has a background in business and in finance, and certainly all of them are music fans. This makes them very good at serving the needs of customers and definitely serving the needs of record labels. But I want you to think, how difficult is it for them to really prioritize and empathize with the needs of musicians? How easy is it for them to understand the problems that musicians go through? And if they can't understand the problems, how do you think they'll be able to fix them? So I wanted to go more generally, and across the United States, because this is the country that I know better, 72% of these are male, over half of them are white, and the majority of at tech companies in the US are male. Now, this definitely does not reflect of the customers and all the constituencies that these companies are serving. I worked for a company called demographics were a bit better. So about half of our employees, a little over half were white, and half of the executives were female. This definitely reflected the demographics of the customer. Through the rest of the presentation, I'm going to give examples from my personal experience. And I know that every company is different, every country is different, group of people is different, but my hope is maybe some of my ideas will inspire you to think of your own ideas about how you can improve. But first, a little bit of, so I was, yeah, and I moved to Australia where I grew up. After that, I moved to the United States and I attended Harvard University where I studied economics. As part of my degree in Europe, I went to France and Switzerland and I studied the economics of sports with the International Olympic Committee and also with the Tour de France. And then after that, I went to Silicon Valley and I joined my first tech company. My path into tech was not exactly smooth. So I originally decided to be part of tech because I knew that technology is an important part of improving the quality of life of billions of people around the world. And I also knew that technology is a critical part of this. But I'm the kind of person where, let's say I see a problem with a phone, something that we use every day. To fix the problem, I need to understand why the phone works the way that it does. Then I taught myself software engineering. Now, this was a process that took, for most of it, I did jobs for free. And all, I would say 20 or 30 interviews that I did, I was asked to leave before the interview was even finished. So it was pretty challenging. As I entered tech, I joined as the first junior engineer at a tech company. I worked really hard and ultimately became the vice president at that company. But still, when we went to conferences and I went there with my male coworkers, if a vendor came to my male coworker, and after a while, my male coworker would say, "Oh, that's really interesting, but I can't make that decision, and you should probably talk to my boss." So none of them ever thought that I was even possibly the manager, let alone the executive at the company. I thought this was interesting, but for me, I wasn't really offended. I knew that it just reflected the demographics of the industry. And I wanted to think about one day, how could I maybe do something or say something to try and make it easier for people who don't look like the stereotypical. Hello? People who don't look like the stereotypical tech worker to be in tech. So for 7 years, I worked in HopSkipDrive, which is a rideshare company for kids. So basically like an Uber for kids. But the last part of my journey is the one that totally changed my life. So when I was a kid, I learned about the Amazon rainforest. And to me, it was this amazing place with biodiversity and so many animals and plants. When I was an adult, I was able to visit for the first time. And I was blown away. And when I was in the Amazon, I knew that this needs to be what I devoted my life to. I saw that the Amazon rainforest literally makes a lot of the oxygen that all of us breathe every single day. And helping the ecological health of the planet became my mission in life. I also happened to meet one of the organizers of this event during this trip, and so that brings us to today. So my current pursuits, from being a junior engineer, I'm now a tech investor. Two of my recent investments are in Omaze and Masterclass. Omaze is a platform where people can donate money to charities and nonprofits, and in return, one person gets an amazing prize. For example, recently somebody got a chance to have lunch with George Clooney at his property in Lake Como. And Masterclass is a platform maybe some of you use. It's where you can take classes from some of the most gifted people in the world. And I do so as part of Angels. So Gangels is an organization made up of LGBT members, and we invest money alongside venture capital companies into companies that have LGBT leadership. I think this point is very important. because at the end of the day, where the money goes and where the money comes from is critical in keeping tech moving along, and it also greatly influences the direction of the future of tech. I'm also a trader by day, and I'll soon be going to Central America to follow up on some of my ideas that I had when I visited the Amazon. So I'm looking for some opportunities right now to go on diving trips to try and restore some of the coral reefs. So some of you might know that the coral reef in the Caribbean is the second largest coral reef system in the world. I'm also going to be involved in some organizations that are restoring mangrove habitats so that original species that used to live in these habitats, like jaguars, can start appearing there again. And then intellectually, I'm very interested in, and I've been studying a lot about artificial intelligence, because as important as nature is to me, humans are a huge part of the problem. And I believe that we can work together with nature by having our technology complement nature. So I've been researching artificial intelligence as well as clean energy with wind and solar, and the very exciting things that blockchain technology can bring for us. And I'm most excited about Ethereum. So there's three things that I'm going to talk to you today during the talk. The first is why diversity matters. The second is what you can do starting today. And the third is a challenge that I hope some of you will accept. But the first, why diversity matters. So I'm going to give you examples using very real people, and I'm going to talk about the business impacts of diversity. I'm going to do this because I think the theory is important, and also at the end of the day, you have a business to run, or you have a city to run, and it matters what the ultimate outcome is going to be of things like diversity. So these are the three founders of HopSkipDrive, the Uber for Kids company that I used to work for. And these three founders are three moms, three professionals who were working, who met each other because their kids were friends. And one day the three moms met at one of the kids' birthday parties, and they were talking about all of the challenges that moms face. And one of the biggest challenges is driving their kids to school and all of their activities. Because they were all working, one is a lawyer, one works in marketing, one works at a bank, it was very hard for them to leave in the middle of the day to drive their kid to school. And so they all said, well, what if we all put in a little bit of money and we buy a van, and then we have some of the neighborhood moms drive our kids everywhere they need to go? Then we don't need to individually each drive our kid. Well, the idea evolved and it turned into a rideshare company. Now, a lot of people have tried to solve this problem in the past. Even Uber, to some extent, tries to do rides for kids, but it's actually not legal. And other companies have attempted to solve this problem, but none of them have ever succeeded. And I think, after experiencing over 5 years at the company, that the reason this company is able to have been so successful is because the founders really understood and empathized with the problems of their customer. They were moms. And so even with the very first ride, they thought to themselves, how can we build a company that is so safe and a service that is so safe that I would put my own child in the car? And in fact, the very first ride took one of their children from school back home. So as a result of their background, they've raised over $70 million, and they're the #1 company in reinventing student transportation in the United States. This is an industry that's over 100 years old, and HopSkipDrive is the first company that has really made a breakthrough in changing what transportation for students looks like. My second example is our Vice President of Strategic Development. Her name is Kiana. Her background is really interesting. She started out as a teacher, and then she was an education technology executive for over 10 years. Before Kiana, we focused mostly on moms. So the people who were our customers were parents booking rides, and we focused very little on schools. But Kiana came along and told us that there was actually a huge opportunity that the company could seize if we started focusing on schools. She's the person who started speaking to counties and school districts and was able to speak to them in a way where they really felt heard, where they didn't feel like it was a sales pitch. Because she had been a teacher in the past, she understood what teachers and school administrators cared about and what their problems actually were, and she knew how to solve them with our service. So because of Kiana, we were able to pivot the company and switch to helping schools and enter a 25 billion student transportation industry. Now, this is huge, not just for investors, but also for companies, and it greatly broadened the reach of the number of children and families and schools that we could help. Before she was hired, no one on the team had a background in education, and now after she was hired, 50% of the team has a background in education of some sort. And you can imagine just how helpful this is for us to understand the problems of our customers so that we can properly help them solve these problems. So the third example I want to tell you about is not related to HopSkipDrive, but it's something that is mind-blowing and I think is such a clear and incredible example of how a lack of diversity has held companies back in the past. So some of you might be fans of dance, and you may or may not know, but the first ballet tights were invented in 1790. Now there's a certain color in ballet tights, which is nude, and the nude color is basically supposed to be the same color as the skin of the dancer. Well, there's a small problem, which is that for the majority of dance history, the color nude was the color of a white woman. This is a problem because there were people who were not white who were also dancers. So when they put on these nude tights, it didn't feel like and it didn't look like the color of their skin. So I want you guys to guess how many years it took before companies started inventing nude tights that were suitable for people of other skin colors. So 2006. It took over 200 years for us to create tights that actually looked like the skin color of the dancers. Now in the 1730s, the first ballet shoes were invented, and just like tights, they were meant to be the same color as the dancer's skin so that it blended smoothly and looked great on stage. But even with this, it wasn't until 2020 before ballet shoes became widely available in colors besides white. Now, obviously, on stage, this didn't look good, but also these companies missed out on a huge market opportunity, which was creating clothing that actually matched their clientele. And who knows the number of ballet dancers that never became ballet dancers because they literally did not look like their own skin color when they went on stage. So I want to talk a little bit about what you can do today, but first, I want to start out with a story. One of the biggest objections oftentimes raised about diversity is that it's really difficult and it's really time-consuming to build a team that looks very different from what it looks like today. So recently, I went on a drive across the United States. It was over 3,000 kilometers. I saw 6 cities, and it took about 41 hours of driving. So I had a lot of time in the car, and I was able to see and think a lot about the country that I live in. And this is what I saw, and this is a lot of what I thought about, which is throughout most of the country, I saw signs for fast food. So this is for McDonald's, burgers, pizza, and what was more shocking is that after you left the highway and you entered the cities, you saw signs like this for heart hospitals. And so the connection was pretty obvious. If you eat mostly fast foods and that's the primary food option that's available, then yes, you're going to have heart disease. This is the first time that I've seen that heart hospitals are in such high demand that they actually put ads on the highway telling you to go there to treat your heart condition, which of course is largely caused by your diet. And so I started thinking to myself, what belief system could lead to a situation where a country mostly consumes fast food in the majority of its cities and towns. And I realized that this was linked to something I had learned in economics, which is consumption decisions versus investment decisions. So this chart measures two things. On the left side, it measures the benefit to you. So if there's a negative benefit, that means that there's a cost. For example, you spend $2 to buy a burger. When it's positive, that means you get some sort of benefit from it. So you feel good after you eat the burger. If you think about eating as a consumption decision, then after you finish eating the burger, there's no cost and no benefit. It's done. But if you think about it as an investment decision, then over time, all of the burgers that you eat and the pizza and the fast food actually start to be a negative impact on your health. And these negative impacts accumulate. While I was driving, I kept thinking back to this meal that I ate in the Amazon. It was prepared by a woman who lived in the local area. And it was so simple. It was chicken, some vegetables, bananas, rice, but it was so delicious. And it was so fulfilling. And you could feel afterwards that you felt stronger and you felt like this was something that could carry you through the rest of the day. And I thought to myself, what belief system would a group of people need to have to eat this sort of food instead of pizzas and burgers? And in this case, well, you would need to value healthy food as a positive investment decision. So in this case, you might spend $2 for the meal, but over time, the benefits of eating healthily start to add up, prolonging your life, making you happier, giving you more energy. I want to apply the same sort of framework to the way that we think about hiring. Because traditionally, this is really important, I think that hiring is thought of as a consumption decision and not necessarily as an investment decision. If it's thought of as a consumption decision, then of course it makes sense. Let's try and create the most efficient system to bring the next person in the door, train them, and then have them working hard. But if you think about it as an investment decision, then somebody who brings new skills that no one on the team has, a new background that no one on the team has, will start to add benefits to the company that far exceed the benefits of someone who already looks like and already has the same background as everyone else at the company. So I have two specific tips that I can sort of offer you. And these were ideas that we implemented at my previous company, and I think were really transformational in how we approached hiring. So the first is to treat hiring like marketing. A lot of you are probably very good already at marketing and sales. And as part of that, you probably create funnels to track your acquisition spend and what your customer looks like at each stage of the life cycle. Well, I think you can actually apply the same framework and reasoning to hiring. So this is a funnel that I've created in the past. And what I did was I had a control group. So for example, male, and then a group that I knew we didn't have enough of on the team, in this case, female. And I tracked the number of candidates who made it through every step of the funnel. So why is this important? Well, instead of trying to fix hiring as a big problem, which is very difficult, I could instead start to focus on very specific, quantifiable, and solvable issues. For example, on the top level, this is hypothetical, but you can see that we were reviewing more male resumes than female resumes. Okay, well, this means that our top of funnel for women is not as robust as our top of funnel for men. Let's say we have 30 male resumes and 20 female resumes. What can we do? What new recruiters might we reach out to? What are new places we can search to get more female resumes? And if you've worked with marketing funnels, you know that changes that you make at the top of the funnel have an exponential effect on stages lower and lower and lower in the funnel. Another thing I encourage you to include if you decide to use this kind of funnel is the number of employees who leave. So this could be a termination or it could be a resignation. This is important because the number of employees who leave in every demographic, whether it's female or people of a certain age, people of a certain race or ethnicity. This reflects what your company's culture is like after they join. And this might be even more important than just trying to bring different people into your company. The second idea that I have is to interview the way that you work. So most tech companies have a whiteboarding challenge as part of their interview. What basically happens is you're asked to come into a room with a whiteboard, you're given a problem, and then the interviewer sits there silently as you try to solve the problem. I remember during my interview process that I did horribly at this. And when I was on the other side conducting these whiteboard interviews, I noticed something really interesting, which is that these interviews benefit people who are confident, but not necessarily competent. This was important because this isn't even how we work. The way that engineers work is we work together on computers. It's not something where we sit there silently and wait for the person to fail. We ask each other questions, we talk back and forth. And so I changed the process. Instead of having a whiteboarding session, I gave people a problem to solve that was written on a sheet of paper, and they had a week to solve it at home. This was much more like the way that engineers actually work. Then, when they came to the company, we had a list of questions that was always asked in exactly the same way. And for each question, we had our expectations for what the candidate would say. And then every person on the team would grade the candidate an A, a B, or a C on how well they did on the question objectively. This completely transformed our hiring results because all of a sudden we were hiring people who were competent, even if they weren't confident in those first few interviews. The business impact. So before we implemented this, we had about a 44% one-year retention rate, meaning that we were making the wrong hires. And after this change, we had a 100% one-year retention rate. So if people were leaving, it had to do with issues that were totally unrelated to the hiring process. And I can remember several specific examples of engineers. In fact, most of the current team are people who may not have done very well on this whiteboarding challenge, but given a take-home where they can work in silence and really think about it, they're able to excel and show their competence rather than just their confidence. So my last section is a challenge for you. And this is, I know for many of you, just a lot of theory and examples that maybe apply, but I think it's really important that for everyone, you think about why having a team with different backgrounds might be important. If the why isn't strong enough, then it doesn't matter what goals you set, it'll be very hard to follow through on it. And so in our case, and I think in the case of many companies, the why for prioritizing hiring a more diverse team often is related to solving what seems like an impossible problem. So before we brought in Kiana, the Vice President of Strategic Development, it was basically impossible for us to go to a school and get their business. We didn't really understand them, so we couldn't solve their problem. So think about what part of your customer might you expand to, or maybe even what part of your customer that currently exists has a problem that seems completely impossible. And if you brought in a team that understood their challenges and brought in solutions that were innovative, might you be able to solve that impossible problem? The second thing I want you to think about is where and when. And what I mean by this is, if we want to make a change in anything that's in our companies, of course we have to know where we currently are and where we want to be. So this means as simply as taking a poll of what % of your company is male versus female, different age ranges, different ethnicities, even different education backgrounds, just to see where you currently are. And then connected to the why, state specifically by a certain date where you want to be. And for some companies, maybe what's feasible is to only add one additional person in each category in order to achieve solving this impossible goal. The important thing is to have a specific goal and to have a timeline. And then finally, a who. if there's no one accountable, then nothing is going to happen. What I encourage you is that if this becomes a priority for your organization, maybe don't choose the one person who is Black or the one person who is LGBT to try and lead the effort. They already have enough on their plates already. But the important thing is to find a single person who will keep track of this goal and help keep everybody else accountable. So this brings us back to two of the photos that I showed you at the beginning. On the left is the Great Green Wall of China, and on the right is a photo of the Amazon rainforest. Every tree in the Amazon is different. They all serve a different purpose. They're different ages. And together as a team, they're able to form the most amazing biodiverse place on the planet. It's given us medicine. It gives us oxygen. It does something that is simply impossible for the forest on the left to accomplish. So the next time that you're at a team meeting, or even the next time you use your favorite text service, maybe you think to yourself, does the team that runs the service look more like the left, or does it look more like the right? What opportunities might we be missing out on? What problems could we solve that we aren't currently solving? And what new trees can we plant that are different than the ones that are currently here that can help us go closer to our goals? So that's my presentation. Thank you everybody for listening. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. So the first question is, do you believe that the market will identify this need for different backgrounds soon? Well, I think that there's two different ways to look at the market. One is from the perspective of consumers, and maybe another is from the perspective of investors, because they're both different markets that contribute to a company. I would say that if we think about it from the consumer perspective, then it's already been identified. And what I mean by this is that musicians and people who work closely with musicians already know every single day that Spotify doesn't necessarily address their needs as musicians and doesn't prioritize them. And so this is simply a reality that they live. Or in the case of dancers who are Black or brown, they knew every day that the product wasn't made for them. If we think about it from the perspective of investors, well, the goal of an investor is to maximize your return on investment. And I think that a lot of examples that are coming to light recently of companies that are and aren't quite doing their part in building a diverse background is starting to make it more obvious what the impacts are. And I think that investors will start to see organizations such as Angels, for example, that prioritizes LGBT leadership and also LGBT companies. And they'll be able to see on paper what the results are when you prioritize diversity in investing. Hopefully that answers the question.